for joining us today for our first of what I expect will be many sessions or events that we organise like today, where we bring some panellists in. So hear from some of the members of the community about different topics. And today we're talking about ChatGPT and prompts, and also the other tools. And very pleased to have James and Jules accept the invitation to join me on panel. So the format for things is it's be fairly informal. So if you do want to interrupt or contribute to the conversation, feel free to put your hand up and get in. We will leave some time towards the end for some Q&A, but basically we'll just round table things. We'll head to James first to hear about a little bit about him, his business, and what he's been using AI, in particular ChatGPT, for, and we'll then go to Jules and I'll provide a little bit of input on my journey. And then we'll have a discussion around prompting, and then we'll close things out with sort of discussion around other tools. So that's what we're up to today. It's a Meet the Panellists section, and James from ProPower Consultants, Jules from Design Advisory, and I wear a few hats and have been using AI in each of those. So let's kick off, James, with you. Perhaps just take the floor and tell us a little bit about yourself.
You want me to show some things on the screen?
Yeah, if you've got some things on screen you'd like to share.
Just made some notes so I wouldn't forget. Got that?
Indeed.
Okay, so I work as an AI consultant now. I sort of came into that after COVID. I was a vice president for strategy and business development for an oil and gas and energy company. I was living up in Malaysia at the time, and I've lived in a couple other countries around the world, Dubai and New York and so forth. But COVID sort of killed the energy industry at the time, and then that sort of intersected with the move to renewables, and a few of us were out on the street, and I was one of them. So I came back and I started just doing some consulting in project management and business development and the like, and also wanted to be a day trader, so trading Forex and Bitcoin and stuff like that, as a view to sort of pushing into my retirement and so forth. And I got into algo trading, and then that led me to AI algo trading, so building algorithms with AI and so forth. And I did a course at the University of Sydney, AI fluency course, and trading was sort of up and down, and it's a pretty hard sort of game, and also the the working as a day rate consultant was hard gig as well. So I started focusing more and more on the AI, and so now my thing is really to take businesses that don't quite know how to get started into AI, do a readiness sort of assessment on them, look at their data, look at their businesses, and give us some advice on what the kind of things that they could start with. And I have a pilot program mapped out for them, and then we workshop into bigger programs and so forth. So that's fundamentally what I'm doing. But there's still I'm still sort of trying to build the business up to. Most people want to just go and jump into AI and get some agents or some products and so forth, but I try and get them through more of a structured process, because AI is moving so quickly at the moment. Then if they start to lock themselves into certain tools and vendors, then they find 12 months down the track they're having trouble changing. So that's me. I've had 30, nearly 40 years in shipbuilding, defence, and oil and gas, so heavy industry. So I try and look for businesses that have got that sort of construction and engineering and type development to them. So that's sort of in my early week, and I've got a master's in project management and so forth. So that's where I'm at. From a tool perspective, what I have been doing with some clients, besides the sort of just, when I go into AI, usually look for some easy wins like, accounting and, emails and, simple stuff that we can put into an automation and so forth. But, then on the side, I also build some agents and some custom GPTs for them. And some of the things that I've built up are like taking tenders and the like, as I was in business development and proposals for a long time, and taking tenders and extracting the requirements from a tender, pulling in some market data and so forth, and trying to push out a bid strategy and stuff like that, so they've got a better, more contextual view of the market when they put their bids together. So I do that as sort of a bit of a sideline and one-offs, but the sort of the bread and butter is more just taking people up to into new business. I pretty much use ChatGPT all the time. Open the computer in the morning and up comes ChatGPT, and I find that everything I do now, whether it's research or writing or development, I'm always going to ChatGPT and looking for stuff. And I really think that for a person like myself in a small business, the benefits are that, I can, if I want to do some marketing or I want to do some other thing, I can pretty much find, 80% of what I need and get by using ChatGPT or something else. And it's only really when when you want some really expert advice that you sort of have to go out and use an expert. And I guess that I was talking to Rob before, that sort of, if I put it into context, when I work in a large engineering business, if I go and see the engineers about a question, I might come back an hour and a half later more confused than I went there. But I find now that I can sort of ask ChatGPT the question in my terms and get an answer in my terms. So I think, I think most managers and people in business these days need to be using this, because they're going to, from a productivity point of view, it's going to be absolutely fantastic for them. And I just don't think they're using it enough. Getting up to the prompting side of things and so forth, I just did a bit of a sequence here, and I don't know whether people know, but you can put all of your background information into ChatGPT. So, I've said here, I'm a consultant, my background is project management and so forth, and you can pull all that information back in. I've linked it up to my LinkedIn. I've got a link to my website, and then I tell it how I want it to talk to me. So that is sort of and I've said, tell it like it is. Don't sugarcoat responses. Take forward-thinking view. Adopt a skeptical questioning approach, because sometimes ChatGPT can be too sycophantic. A lot of people have been complaining about that lately. It gets too nice. So wanting it to actually push back a bit and because it says yes to everything. So you've got to stop it doing that, by asking more questions and telling it, if I'm wrong, tell me. Otherwise, it's sort of, it's a bit sort of cute and won't tell you you're wrong. So that's sort of the context that goes into the standard background of ChatGPT. And then obviously when you're then prompting, you're giving it instructions on top of that baseline instruction. I have set up a couple of custom GPTs here, and I've got what's called a prompt refinery. So I actually put in my question there, and then it will produce a prompt that is more on the theme, and it's more complete and so forth. And I've got one here that's fairly simple, and then I've got one that's quite a bit more complex. Yeah. What is the best way to
And this is a similar sort of thing that that MindHive does with multi-agents, but here you get to see how the one-on-one goes and how the one-on-one can be quite effective if you've got good GPTs set up.
All right, I did it again. So I'm going to transfer this one over to the other one. Paste that in there, click that button. All right, so it's given me two draft prompts here. It said as a data science specializing in AI applications. So it's starting to give it context and a role, and it's telling it, it's telling the model how it wants the data presented and so forth. So my advice would be that there's 1,000 videos on YouTube about prompt engineering, and there's the typing in, where you're putting in context, role, all that sort of stuff, and there's lots of acronyms around that people are following, to do this. So, if you want to get better answers and better contextual answers, then follow one of those. And then if you want to go to the next level, then there's these instructions that you put into ChatGPT that will produce, quite a long prompt. So there you go. I'm embarrassed
Awesome. Now. No, you've done well, and we'll circle back because you also use other tools in the Google suite widely. But let's first hear from Jules. No need to be screen sharing, but if you've got something, that's fine too, Jules. But go for it.
No, nothing to share. Not as brave as James. Working with
It always
AI.
happens with the demo, James.
That's why.
100%, especially with AI. You never know what it's going to give you anyway.
So perhaps just take yourself off share, please, James.
So my background's in broad-based transformation. So I've been doing that for about 7 years. Professional services organisations, kind of between 10 mil and 50 mil turnover. And as soon as the whispers of agents started coming, I wondered how this would impact knowledge workers. I'm sure you've read a lot about the doom and gloom around that. But just starting to think about how to introduce AI to firms, because I'm sure, as you guys have experienced, there's people on their journey at vastly different stages, and I think that's really important to understand. And as a consultant, I like to meet them where they are, and then to take them from there. So as part of my transformation, I've sort of got 7 different areas of business performance that I look at, and thought I'd give you some examples of how I've been using Gen AI in the realm of the strategy office. So some experiences there, and just getting people familiar and used to using ChatGPT or any others in a very safe way. So making sure they're not using any proprietary information in open models. If they do want to look at uploading any of their financials, things like that, making sure they're using an organizational large language model. I think that's really important because the safety issue is a concern for many. So one we like to address first. But I've been building multi-step workflow prompts, I think, like where James was going with that, and incredibly useful in driving a conversation before you even know where that conversation will go. But some examples for the strategy office: strategy development. So having board members represented as stakeholder twins, if you like. So creating a personal twin for each board member, understanding what their fears and motivations are, their objectives and personality styles. So creating an actual avatar for each of the board members was one of the examples we executed with a leadership team, which I think people found really interesting. As I said, it's just to get them on their journey towards it. That's not meant to be a super productive use of Gen AI, but just to get them familiar and comfortable. Another one is using the 6 thinking hats, Edward de Bono's, making sure that you're getting diverse perspectives back and circling any particular issue or strategy initiative through all different lenses. I think to James's point, you don't want to be raised too much by chat. It's always so supportive. So how do we bring in some tension, some conflict to that by seeking different perspectives on the issues that we're talking about? So that's been a really useful way, something to incorporate. And really, it's not to give you the answers to the issue that you're looking for. It's really to give you a new lens or different perspectives to allow that more divergent thinking, especially when dealing with different stakeholders, whether they be staff, board members, or external to your organisation in regulators, suppliers, vendors and things like that. So what's the language that you could use with those different stakeholders and some different ideas? Sticking with the strategy office, scenario planning's been a bit of a fun one. I didn't know how this would initially go, but what I hear from clients is the staff are busy, but they don't know what they're doing is actually aligned to the strategic goals. And the leaders are saying, well, we want more staff to take ownership of what they're delivering. So we've developed a narrative-based scenario planning that's gamified, if you will. So using AI to create the narrative. You can have fantasy, you can have naval. There's so many. I think we've got 15 now different themes where they create the different characters and create a really compelling story that actually makes scenario planning a little bit fun, but also highly productive because you can introduce scenarios. You get the leadership team, you get the participants, but you can get AI to participate in the creation of some of these scenarios as well. And then have it come up with some scoring methodologies. Looking at the PESTLE framework as well. So giving it the political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental, and asking it, what's the current context for this sector? You can ask it to look at it globally, domestically, and then for that sector, and it actually does a pretty good job. Again, it's not meant to provide you all the answers, but just to stimulate some of the thinking and to give you different perspectives. If you find it's not giving you any perspectives, new perspectives, ask for new and novel ways, new and novel perspectives, and it will start to bring some left field thinking into it. And the final one for the strategy office is an actual agent use case, so a market analyst. So to draft a weekly board note on the market and competitor analysis. And I say draft because you don't really want the agent to be pushing it at this stage to the board. I found it difficult for any LLM to understand the significance of any news because it doesn't quite fully understand the context. But as we get better at embedding the context in the LLMs, and training them on the significance of different issues, it will get a lot better. So there's an agent that's constantly monitoring the news cycle and will draft a weekly note on market and competitor analysis. So there's a few tips that I've been using in the strategy office for clients.
Gems, absolute gems. And I think one of the things that I like about that approach and just generally how this space works is the opportunity to leverage proven frameworks. So I really hadn't heard of anyone using the Edward de Bono six thinking. And when you started to work with that, and I guess you've optimised it a bit now, are you really seeing quite diverse views from those approaches? Are they...
For
if
sure.
you pose a problem, are they a little bit similar and just nuance, or do you really generate some quite different outcomes?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think, every time we use AI, it's going to give a different answer. And sometimes even when you ask for detailed answers, it actually just provides a summary. It's not detailed enough. So, and that's why you have the multi-step workflow. So you can deal with one thing at a time and not ask it for everything at once. If you're not quite comfortable with the diversity of thought, or you're not quite comfortable with the level of detail that's there, you just ask it for a little bit more of what you want before going on to the next frame. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that is seems to be a common finding from some of the people that I've spoken to about things. So let's before I just fill in a little bit on some of the stuff that I've been doing with ChatGPT across different companies. With some of the stuff that Jules has talked about there with sort of process sort of things and different frameworks, have any of you in the audience been doing similar sorts of things and have anything to sort of add or share or any questions to ask of either of the gents so far? Just come off, Mike. We'll go to you, Michael.
Can you hear me all right? I'm sorry.
We can indeed, sir.
Yeah, just questions, I guess, and some thoughts. First of all, it is my understanding that there seems to be quite a concern that the hallucinations are not reducing, they're actually increasing. And so I'm just wondering, especially in complex tasks, how do you mitigate for that? In my case, when I look, for example, for research on, say, psychological stuff, I make sure that the only research that it quotes has to be published in peer-reviewed magazines. So I give it some parameters that I know might mitigate that. But I think the more complex the task that you're asking it to do, the more difficult to know how much of it is true, really.
Yeah.
So I wonder about that. And the other thing, and that's a sort of a long-term business, impact. I met a very interesting chap who does AI for Amazon Web Services. He says one of the things that's kind of like not talked about, but is apparently quite prevalent, is the fact that it costs the larger companies who operates those models a lot more than what it costs us to sign for the services. And they taking just a long-term view, get us really hooked and addicted to being, to work with those things to the point where we can't do without them, and then whack us with a whole lot of charges. I think he quoted something like $100 a month for the $19 that we might be paying ChatGPT at the moment is carried by Amazon. So
Yeah,
just thoughts about that, because obviously that will have an impact if we become very addicted to the whole model, which we will. I have no doubt. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I don't know, James, if you've got any thoughts, but maybe just a quick one. My understanding is most of the costs come in the training, and basically they've trained as much as they can, basically, on the knowledge that has been created by humans. And in fact, they're starting to create synthetic data to start training models even further, which is quite meta in itself. But also with what we saw with DeepSeek coming out a few months ago out of China is the cost of actually building these models will be coming down significantly. That said, we do have Google and Meta looking to build nuclear reactors to try to manage the
Michael,
costs
we
as
might just
well.
get you to go onto mute for a bit, mate. Thanks.
So it is a dynamic that I think collectively we should be considering, but I think my personal feeling is that should be solved by the time they want to start charging the actual pass-through amount. Just quickly on the hallucinations, yeah, I think it's absolutely true, which is why we shouldn't trust it, but allow it to provide some information that we can then fact check. You can build a custom GPT, and I'm not sure if you've done that, a more adversarial model that actually you ask it to act as a human and actually check all elements. It's a little bit like the blue team, red team when you start talking about agents. So there's a few things you can do there to minimize it, but I think you should always be skeptical of it. Yeah.
James, anything that you wanted to add on those before
if there's anything of sort of, factual nature, where you have to be very specific and factual, I use the deep research in both Gemini and ChatGPT anyway. So, it's going off and looking at papers and it's giving references and so forth. So, when you get an answer out of, the model, I think you just take it with, for what it's worth, and it's it's an intelligent partner in the whole mix that you're working in. I think, it's not the be all and end all.
If I can add to that as well, I think the prompting is so important. There's a lot of stuff coming out now that's kind of saying the models are getting better, so you don't need to worry about prompting as much. And I think that's kind of causing a lot of people to be quite lazy in their prompts. And if you do a lazy prompt, you get a lazy response. Whereas if you do quite a detailed prompt, and when I talk about a detailed prompt, you're doing task, objective, like it's a proper brief, and you're showing context and you're talking about examples and those sort of things, then you'll get a very good response back. So I think the comment about the hallucination, to me, is two parts: what model LLM are you using, but two, making sure that you're prompting correctly, and that stuff will reduce your hallucination.
Yeah, no, really good points, David. And it is one of the things I like about the way that the MindHive discussions have been done, is that it tends to find some articles that support the comments that you can then work out whether you actually think they are factual or not. But at least you getting a chance to check things. The other thing I heard the other day, which I found quite interesting and actually a little bit obvious, but I had never thought of it, is given that Google and Facebook have basically made all their money off advertising, and ChatGPT is the new search engine, what is the equivalent new industry of SEO, and how might these big companies be looking at monetizing things with that? It'll be interesting space to watch, I suspect. Has anyone heard anything about how that's positioning as to pay to be found on GPT?
Yes, I think people are now saying, well, let's go and talk to the to the LLM makers about getting into their algorithms, and I heard a figure yesterday that something like 40% of answers are now being taken out of that little snippet at the top of Google, and no one is going below that. They just say, you ask a question, you get an answer in that first paragraph, and people are then exiting at that point. So Google's shooting themselves in the foot, as well as gilding the lily on the other side of the
Yeah, no, there is a few things to that. There are different ways to optimize for getting into those summaries now. That's a slight tweak on the old SEO format. It's largely the same, though. They've got crawlers going through the website. Do you trust the website? Yes, and here's the answer. You can be careful, though, of those summaries, because your LLM knows you now, that the memory is getting better. So my partner, she's a meditation teacher, she was asking for a summary, and it just gave her her materials back as responses. So everyone's answers are going to be different, and yours will be biased based on your history with the LLM. So it will be very interesting to see how that develops. Chat and Google have recently released shopping through their platform as well. So no doubt they'll be taking clips there. So rather than maybe ad spend, it'll be actual product purchase.
Excellent. All right. Well, we've got another 8 or 9 minutes left, and whilst this will be an interesting conversation to keep going, I think this will come up other times. We'll have different people on, and because it's the one that's most of us are using, at least in the suite, we will talk about chat often and different aspects of it. But let's have a move on to some other ones. So James, you mentioned Gemini and Google. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're using and how and why you're using other tools?
Look, I was swapping backwards and forwards between Gemini and ChatGPT, and then I moved over to the small business suite on Google, and so now I've got both. But I just find you get different answers, and it's good to ask the same question on both of them to get a different perspective. And but Google has building this whole sort of suite, with AI Studio and so on, and they've got Firebase, which now you can go and build agents, for free in Firebase. It's not as good as some of the paid ones, but and all of the sheets and docs and all that sort of thing in Google now all got Gemini in them, and you just type in, I want this picture on a slide, and it develops a slide for you with a custom picture and so forth. So that's really good. But my favorite one is Notebook LM. That if you want to learn anything, Notebook LM is just, it's the duck's guts, as they say. You put 10 documents in and 20 documents or whatever, and it distills them down, and it can give you a podcast that you can listen to while you're walking the dog. It can give you a training course. It can give you a brief. And just recently, it's got the new capability to actually go and discover sources and do the same thing as if you put them in manually. I started off just putting all these, I look at a lot of YouTube videos and I didn't have the time to watch them. So I was just putting all the links in there and getting a summary out of all of them. And, so 10 hours of video turns into 10 minutes of reading a brief. And if you're interested, you go and read more. So that's a tool that is really, really fantastic, I think.
Awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And now in 50 languages.
So how about you share your experience with Notebook? And the only thing I'll throw into the ring is just with one of the companies that I do. We've been using Notebook a little bit, but to you, Jules, please.
No, just quickly. Yeah, they've just upgraded to 50 languages, and it's got a great new mind map feature as well. I've always loved the mind map, so yeah, I'm with James. It's a standout.
So it's a bit of a show of hands in the room. I actually haven't personally used Notebook. A company that I work for called Phantom that does work in the sustainable packaging space. So we work with brands like Danone and Unilever and Mecca and so on with helping them identify what they've got happening with packaging and where there may be opportunities to reduce or to replace with other sorts. And we've been on a journey doing basically consulting work with a view to building a digital platform to take that further. But in the process, we've generated all these reports for different companies, developed our own voice and so on. And Notebook's been really quite helpful in digesting that. David, have you used it or?
I haven't used it. I've referred it a lot, so I haven't had any big chunky documents that I need to throw in there and listen to as a podcast yet. But I've referred it to other people that work in property and place, and they've already sent me notes back saying I loved it. So I know what it can do. I just haven't had the need for it at this point in time.
And maybe you, Pam, and then to Michelle.
I realise I know almost nothing, and it's just haven't had much experience at all, and I'm just keen to learn because I really want to help bring some rural communities into the 21st century. So I need to come there myself. And I really appreciate your experience that you've shared here today. Thank you.
Michelle?
No, I've had some exposure through Microsoft and Copilot, Gemini, and using them, but realise that, like Pam, there's an enormous gulf between what a lot of people know and trust, and then companies at the very high end that can wrap their head around the potential for these some of these tools. And interestingly, I was listening to somebody the other night, university lecturers, saying that at universities, asking someone, did you use AI to help you write that essay? The answer will be, no, not at all. And then it's, did you use it to do this and this and this? And then they're basically realizing the entire essay could have just been produced with.
Yeah, it's going to be very difficult.
And I'm just intrigued. We cannot lose critical thinking and analysis and the ability. And I found even, say, 12 months ago, 18 months ago, a lot of what was produced, I'd get this spitting out on my computer. I'd be very, very skeptical, being a lawyer and all the rest of it, skeptical of what I was seeing. And I would get to the point questioning ChatGPT, where it would say to me, you've got to go and check that with a human being. Maybe I was a bit too interrogative, but I think to myself sometimes, people coming up, younger people who are almost wired to trust this implicitly, is that going to be problematic? I mean, how can we strike that
100%.
balance? You know,
it's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah,
around,
it is.
around all of this sort of stuff, and I guess something that you touched on Pam is, we are all a journey. I'm actually really early on in my AI journey, and don't get enough time to get as far. So I'm personally going to find this quite useful and helpful. But I think the thing is the fact that there are, you talked about meeting people where they're at, Jules, and that's what it's about. And I think whilst knowledge workers and consultants may be at risk in the longer term, for the near to medium term, there are always going to be people that just don't have the time to work out what to do, and finding consultants that they can trust and be guided with things. And then hopefully having this community as a bit of a sounding board for things to sort of, keep on top of professional development and in the know on things will be, a useful contribution. And for that to work, it relies on people like James and Jules that stepped up to the plate today. So on that note, I would like to thank you all very much for attending. I'd like to thank those of you watching the recording that weren't able to make it to join us today, and a big thank you to James and Jules for sharing their insights. Thanks, everyone. And James,